Okay, today we're going to talk about some of the Army generals for the Allied troops, and then we're going to talk about the preparations and the execution of the D-Day, which is the invasion of Normandy. So these are some of the guys who led the General Dwight D. Eisenhower. He is going to be our 5-star general who ultimately is going to be in charge of all of the Allied troops in Europe. He is the head man. General George Patton, he's going to ultimately be a 4-star general. You see a picture of him here with the 3 stars, but he is going to be in charge of the tank division. And he will be in North Africa and then participate in Operation Torch and Operation Husky, which is the invasion into Italy, working their way up into the southern part of France. So it's kind of we're looking at trying to do a squeeze play on the Eastern Front. General Omar Bradley will also be a 4-star general, and he is the second in command to Eisenhower, and he is much beloved by his men. He's, as a matter of fact, at the Independence Ball, if you ever go to that football game that we have here in Shreveport, they give the Omar Bradley Patriots Award. He is a great hero from. For the English, their head general was General Bernard Montgomery, and he actually was kind of in competition with Patton. They were both kind of prima donnas, and but he was the head guy, a little bit jealous of Eisenhower being in charge of all the Allied troops. So in January of 1943, Churchill and Roosevelt meet in Casablanca, Morocco. Stalin was supposed to show up, but if you remember, this is during the siege of Stalingrad, and he was pretty busy. So at this point in time, they meet with their generals, and they decide on strategy. And the strategy was to attack and go up through Italy, and then they're basically going to try and attack in the northern part of France and squeeze Hitler. And then they discuss the offensive in the Pacific, the island hopping. And they also decide that there will be no negotiation for peace, that they will only accept from Japan and Germany an unconditional surrender. No negotiation. This shows a picture of Churchill and Roosevelt with the generals behind them at Casablanca. And in deference to Roosevelt, you'll notice that in these pictures, the leaders are always seated. And that's because, of course, you know, Roosevelt could not walk, and people just did not realize that. So the leaders would sit in deference to him. Now, Operation Torch. Operation Torch basically is, if you actually look at a map and put your hand kind of on the bottom of the African continent, it kind of looks like a torch. That's how I remember it. But Operation Torch, remember, the Desert Fox Rommel was in control for the Germans. The Americans are going to land on the west coast of Africa, moving their way in, and the English are over there by the Suez Canal. And basically, again, this is going to be kind of a squeeze play. Big battle there at El Alamein, and Operation Torch will force Rommel out of Africa. So, British victory, November of 42. You can put this on your European timeline. This is by Montgomery. And these are the U.S. forces in, and Rommel is right there, and he is going to surrender. Rommel physically is not there. He is back in Germany. He had taken ill, but his troops are forced to surrender due to this squeeze play known as Operation Torch. So now you've got, remember all these operations, we're going to have a little quiz on that. You've got Operation Dynamo, remember D, and Dunkirk. That was the miracle of Dunkirk, the rescue. You've got Operation Sea Lion, which was the bombing of Britain. Then you've got Operation Barbarossa, I think Rosa and Russia. That was Hitler's invasion into Russia. And now you've got Operation Torch, and that is North Africa. The Battle of Al Alamein saved the Suez Canal, and this is part of the defeat of General Rommel, the Germans' greatest general. And notice a trend here where it had been nothing but victory, victory, victory. Now the Germans are going to be experiencing defeat after defeat. And this is the turning point of the war for Hitler in Africa. And they are driven out of North Africa. So remember the battle plan that they came up with at Casablanca, and that was going in through the south of Italy, up to the north, and then into southern France. And they're going to call this Operation Husky. The way I remember this one is whenever you look at Mussolini, he kind of looks like he's a little bit husky. So in July of 43, they start this invasion. Now there's a lot of loss of life here. It's not that easy. The Germans fight in the mountains. They've had several years to fortify their positions, and we are going to lose a lot of guys in Italy. But we fight and break through the German defenses, notice in April of 44, so it takes us about 9 months to break through the defenses in Italy. As the troops are coming, Mussolini is running. So Mussolini is with his mistress and bodyguards. He is trying to escape up into Switzerland. The Italians, his own countrymen who happen to be communist, actually intercept him. They gun him down along with his mistress and his bodyguards, and then they hang him by his feet in the square and basically defile his bodies. And people are throwing shoes at him, they're urinating on them. They hate Mussolini. And you see him here hanging with his mistress, and they actually hung the bodyguards as well. Some say that that's why Hitler had his body burned, because he was aware of this and did not want his body desecrated the way Mussolini's was. So now Churchill and Roosevelt decide to meet again, and this time Stalin is able to meet with them, and they meet at Tehran, okay, and it's called the Tehran Conference. This is now that they know they're going to break through in Italy, and Stalin is moving from the east and pushing the Germans back. On the west, they plan D-Day, and D-Day is the invasion of northern France, and this is going to be a monumental operation, and this can go on your European timeline. So D-Day, it's known as Operation Overlord. Now you have another operation, okay? We just did today Operation Torch and Operation Husky, and now you have Operation Overlord. Operation Overlord is the invasion of mainland Europe, the invasion into the French northern coast, and we are going to use all sorts of subterfuge to keep the Germans from knowing where we are going to be landing, because the coastline is heavily defended, and Rommel had put up many barriers to try and keep this invasion. So people ask, what does D-Day stand for? It really doesn't stand for anything. It just means this is the day. This is the day, and when we say D-Day now, we remember June 6th, 1944. Now remember, June 6, 1944 is a date you have to have on your timeline for Europe, the D-Day invasion, 1944. It's going to be planned and executed by General Eisenhower. Remember, he is the supreme commander of all the Allied troops. Preparation was months in advance. They loaded vehicles and battleships. They actually had tanks. They bombarded the beaches beforehand, trying to kind of soften the resistance by the Germans. But the Germans were in these fortified bunkers, and the bombing actually did very, very little damage. So the plan was over 5,000 ships and landing crafts. 11,000 planes dropped bombs on the beach before the invasion. 175,600 men end up landing on the beach. Thousands of paratroopers were dropped behind the enemy lines, and they were supposed to cut communication lines, try and just sabotage any of their weapons systems. But sadly, a lot of these pilots were brand new. They were flying at night. They didn't have proper coordinates to drop them, and a lot of these paratroopers ended up being either in the wrong place, landing in trees. It was kind of a mess. Lots of them were separated from their units, and basically had to work their way back to one another. 5 beaches were picked for the landing. The beach with the most casualties was Omaha Beach, and that was where the U.S. forces landed, as well as Utah. The British forces on Gold Beach, Juneau, Canadian forces, and Sword was also British. I remember the beaches with the acronym OJUGS. Omaha is the only one you really, really need to know. So you can see here they're taking off from different spots in England, and these are the 5 beaches that they're going to be landing on. What we tried to make Hitler think was that we were going to land to the north at Calais, and that made sense because it was not as long a trip across the English Channel. He actually did. We were able to use all sorts of subterfuge, and he had Calais more heavily fortified than he did at Normandy. Just another example of the different beaches. So these are the guys waiting to disembark. They went in something called a Higgins boat, and the Higgins boat was actually made in New Orleans, and they were flat-bottom boats that went the short distance. They were actually the big boats took them close to the shore, and then the guys jumped in these Higgins boats, these flat-bottom boats, because the big boats couldn't get close enough, and they could take them fairly close to the shore. They open from the front, and that is where you do not want to be, because that's where the Germans had their guns trained. But you can see in this lower picture, after the initial landing, more and more boats coming in. German soldiers were up on a hill. The beach was lower, and they had 75mm machine guns that were trained on these guys coming in. You can see the fortifications that were put in place. It was very important that they know where the tide was, because they didn't want to be low tide, they'd be too far out. High tide, the bottom of the boats would be scraped against these fortifications, the mines and the gates and the ramps that they have. So they kind of wanted to go right there at mid-tide, where they could get them fairly close, see the barriers, and get up closer to the fortifications. We are going to lose 2,500 forces, mostly Americans, on Omaha Beach. Many more lost arms, lost legs. There were bombs, land mines on the beaches. There were lots of casualties. But it was ultimately successful. You can see more and more and more men are landing on the beach after the fortifications are taken out. And the result is going to be the turning point in the West. Okay, the Allies now are going to be able to start moving across France. Some people say this is the beginning of the end of World War II. It broke the German spirit, but the Germans are going to have one more battle up their sleeves.